Okay, so for my 5E, I did a lesson based for third grade. And I included a reading standard, and I also included, of course, my science standard, which for my science standard, it focuses over um, developing use models to describe the organisms have a unique and diverse life cycle, but all have common patterns of birth, growth, reproduction, and death. There is an assessment boundary on this in particular, which would be over reproduction. And then I also added the reading standard because I want to read a book at the end. It's called The Tadpole's Promise. Definitely a good book to read. It's over the life cycle and it follows the story of a tadpole and a baby larva as they go through their individual life cycle. Um, so for my disciplinary core idea, it's plants and animals have unique and diverse life cycle. Um, so basically, they'll be able to experience this in particular as they experience the phenomena of a butterfly's life cycle, ladybug, frog, flower, and even a human life cycle because it's important for them to know their own. And then the second disciplinary core idea that was on there was reproduction is essential to the continued existence of every kind of organism. So this one, due to the assessment boundary, sorry. So this one, due to the assessment boundary, and it only goes to the extent of what is reproduction and why it happens, basically, but you don't go into detail of, oh, reproduction happens like this, because then you will get sued. So then science and engineering practices, you develop models to describe the phenomena. So they'll do this based on creating their own life cycles and they'll actually place it as a cycle. And then cross-cutting ideas, this will mainly be touched on during the assessment. They'll do it throughout the life cycle, of course, or the lesson, but it's mainly on the assessment on how they can use those patterns of change to make those predictions. And again, those patterns that we would focus on for this lesson would be birth, growth, reproduction, and death. Okay. So some common misconceptions are one of them being that a lot of students believe that larva, you have a little worm, and then it just grows butterfly wings and you have a butterfly. There's not really um the students don't really, sorry, think that they go through an individual change and it's a complete change on that. And then another misconception is that some students, on the other hand, believe that there has to be a drastic change for it to be a life cycle. So you have your tadpole to your butterfly. Even with the ladybugs, that's a drastic change that happened. Your mealworms, again, a drastic change. They don't really think about just growth being the change. That's a big misconception that there is. I believe that one comes directly from that article that we read. So my objectives is for students to be able to state the importance of reproduction, of course, based on that assessment boundary, state what a life cycle is, use models to describe what organisms have a unique and diverse life cycle, to identify patterns in each life cycle we explore, and then lastly, to use patterns that we identify to make predictions. So this 5E will be guided inquiry through virtual investigations, just because we as educators would have to provide all the animals, and of course that'd be a lot of money upfront, especially if you have to the enclosures and all of that. So it'll be more practical on our end, and you also have to think about safety wise with some of these kids to do virtual investigations for them to experience them. So in the engage, the students will actually do my formative assessment probe, and it asks them where they believe animals come from, how they're born, if they're from an egg in particular. And then in the explore, they'll visit a butterfly, a ladybug, and a frog. So they'll fill out this chart and it'll be a little bit different from the butterfly. And then when you compare the other two, because in the butterfly, there won't be nothing for them to compare. So the last little area there's no question there. It's just blank. But they'll write down their observations. And then once they go to the next video, it's they'll write down their observations and then in the following little box if they see any similarities or differences between the previous life cycle, which again, I'm not looking for, oh, this animal grew but oh, this animal grew wings, but more of, oh yeah, the similarity is growth, birth, reproduction, all that jazz. And these are all videos from National Geographic, and there's another sciencey website, I completely forgot the name, but it's from their direct YouTube channel, and it's fast forward videos of the animal life cycles. They don't say words, but they are very high quality videos. So these are really good videos. I really like them. In the explain, I'll go over terminology, of course. So what is a life cycle? What is reproduction? Basic stuff. And then I would want them to make that connection with the birth, growth, and death primarily before we mention reproduction, because again, reproduction will be slightly mentioned. And then in elaborate, they'll do a flower and the human one. So with the flower, it'll be a video, and then with the human one, it'll actually be a set of pictures, and I'll show those pictures whenever I get into my evaluation stuff. But again, it's a video, so I decided to do these two in the elaborate phase because they're the ones that went through the less drastic physical change. So I thought it would be beneficial for students to also see that, so that above misconception about physical change being a drastic one not being there for them, or at least attempting to eliminate it as much as possible. Okay, and then for my evaluate phase, the students will be handed envelopes, and each envelope will have different life cycles. These are all be pictures, and they won't be life cycles that we talked about. So it'll be a panda, a duck, a fish, a mealworm, and spider. And their job will be to place them in the order they believe to be correct and why. So I feel like the and why is important because I'm not necessarily asking the students to place them in the correct order. So what I'm asking is for the students to be able to justify the growth, the death, and the birth, and all that stuff. So one of them would be the mealworms, and this is how the pictures are. I would just hand them to them, cut out, and then with the number on the back, and that would be what they would turn in for their individual assessment. And after all the students have turned in, here's the human one as well. After all students have turned in their individual ones, then we will discuss as a class and make those connections. But I did need to be able to collect data on individual students, so I thought this would be the best way to do it. And here's the cute little ducks. Right, so they're all pretty similar to that. And then lastly, for my modifications, let me pull that up real quick. Okay, so modifications for EOL students, minimizing background noise would be one, and then allowing them to use their native language with discussion. For gifted and talented, which is the one I mainly wanted to focus on for this, those students would be given the option, if they chose to, create their own cycle. So they'll pick an animal, any animal they'd want, find how they go through the cycle of life, and then if they wanted to include some cool facts such as this animal, here's its habitat, or stuff like that, they would be allowed to do all of that, and they would present this information to the class. So that one would be a very choose your own adventure type of option for them, just if they would want to challenge themselves or if they want to do a little bit extra. But if they don't want to, then they would just do the exact same thing the above students did. And yeah, that's my 5E. So